So imagine this. You're a junior senator from Illinois, barely 4 years into the national spotlight. Then, after a whirlwind campaign, you're president-elect of the United States of America.
Good morning. Last night, I had a warm conversation with President-elect Barack Obama. I congratulated him and Senator Biden on their impressive victory.
Just weeks after your historic win, you're invited to the White House for a quiet, classified conversation with the sitting president. You're Barack Obama, and that president is George W. Bush. What he tells you next isn't about economic policy, a housing crisis, or some other endless list of bureaucratic issues. It's about something far more explosive. President Bush informs you that deep in Iran, beneath the desert near the city of Natanz, thousands of gas centrifuges are spinning. Enriched uranium is piling up. The intelligence is clear. Iran could be closer than ever to developing a nuclear weapon. And the clock, it's ticking. But here's the kicker. This isn't new to the U.S. intelligence community. In fact, since 2006, under President Bush's administration, the United States, alongside Israel, has been secretly engaged in a full-blown cyber campaign to sabotage Iran's nuclear efforts. This isn't spycraft out of a movie. This is real, and the operation, it has a name: Olympic Games. Now, I need to say this clearly to my listeners. To this day, Operation Olympic Games has never been officially acknowledged by the United States or Israel. It remains one of the most secretive and sophisticated cyber campaigns ever launched, highly classified, and never confirmed through public admission. Welcome to Threat Level Red. I'm your host, Charles Denyer. In episode 4, we dive into Stuxnet, the secret cyber weapon that redefined the rules of engagement. We'll dive into the secretive mission that made it all happen, Operation Olympic Games, and the lasting implications for both Iran and the entire world.
Welcome to Threat Level Red, a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. Every week, Charles brings his real-world expertise to the front lines of America's most pressing threats: cyber attacks, extremist networks, rogue states, terrorism, economic instability, systemic breakdowns, and so much more. From the digital battleground to the streets of America, no threat is left uncovered. No spin, no filters, just intel.
So back to that moment. Imagine being Barack Obama. Just months ago, you're debating foreign policy on the campaign trail against Senator John McCain.
John, with the strategy that's been pursued, was that for 10 years, we coddled Musharraf, we alienated the Pakistani population because we were...
Now the current commander-in-chief, George W. Bush, is telling you that you need to make a decision. Do you continue a covert cyber war against Iran? It's a campaign that's already embedded malicious code into Iranian centrifuge systems, a weapon that would eventually become known to the world as Stuxnet. Obama, still weeks away from taking the oath of office, is now being handed the keys to a shadow war that could determine the fate of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East and potentially set off a chain reaction of global consequences. As for President Bush, he urges Barack Obama to continue the mission, because stopping Iran's nuclear program without direct military confrontation has become a top-tier priority for U.S. national security. Operation Olympic Games is not just a project. It's the tip of the spear in a cyber battlefield where code, not bullets, cripples the enemy. This is the level of threat that gets handed off during a presidential transition. It's not just about binders and briefings. It's legacy programs with monumental consequences that simply don't have the time to wait for inaugurations. And here's what I want you to hold on to as we go deeper into this episode. When Barack Obama walked into the Oval Office as the 44th President of the United States, he wasn't just inheriting a fragile economy from the great financial crisis. He was inheriting an invisible war. That's all up next. And now back to the story. The year is 2010, and Iran's nuclear program is moving fast. Too fast for the West. Enriched uranium is piling up. The threat of an Israeli preemptive strike looms. Behind the scenes, President Obama and his national security team are desperate to buy time. A military assault on Natanz would plunge the region into chaos. But what if there was another way, a quieter way, one that could sabotage the nuclear program without anyone knowing? Enter Stuxnet. It arrived in Iran like a whisper. It brought with it no alarms, no intrusions, rather just malfunctions. Those that were sudden, unexplainable, and persistent. As for the nuclear engineers at the Natanz facility in Iran, they noticed something strange. Centrifuges, critical for enriching uranium, were breaking down at unprecedented rates. They weren't just stopping, they were literally shredding themselves. But there was no evidence of a break-in, no evidence of an attack. Operators saw green lights across the board. Their system said everything was normal, but the machines were failing. What Iran didn't know, what no one knew at the time, was that a malicious worm had infiltrated their most sacred facility. It was a worm designed to lie in wait and strike with surgical precision. But who designed this ghost in the machine? And how do you build a cyber weapon capable of infiltrating a top-secret nuclear facility, especially one that's air-gapped and disconnected from the internet? Well, Stuxnet didn't just happen, it was crafted. The operation behind it, a classified multi-year project known as Operation Olympic Games, jointly developed by the U.S. National Security Agency and Israel's elite cyber unit, Unit 8200. This wasn't about locking someone out of their email. This was about engineering physical destruction via software. So let's unpack this. First, you have the Natanz nuclear facility, one of Iran's most fortified locations. It was completely air-gapped, meaning it had no internet connection, no external access. It was essentially a digital island. But Stuxnet didn't need the internet. It was designed to travel via USB drives. And knowing that Iranian engineers would carry code in and out of the facility manually, that's exactly how this destructive software got in. And once inside, well, that's when it looked for a very specific configuration. Siemens software running on Microsoft Windows that connected to frequency converters made by Iranian and Finnish manufacturers, all of which controlled the P1 centrifuges at the Natanz nuclear facility. Using classified intelligence and insider knowledge of Iran's supply chain, the team crafted a piece of code that could manipulate the Siemens programmable logic controllers that are used to run the centrifuges at Natanz. And when it found the exact match, it struck. But here's the genius and the terror of the malicious software. Stuxnet didn't just shut down the machines, not at all. Instead, it made them spin at the wrong speeds, fast, then slow, then fast again, causing microscopic vibrations and eventual failure, all while feeding false data to the operators at the Natanz nuclear facility. So while the monitoring and surveillance screens would show, hey, everything's fine, the centrifuges were telling a much different story, as Stuxnet would trigger a sequence of failures, then hide those failures from human operators. And security analysts at Symantec, who would later dissect the worm, were astonished. Why? Because of the size of Stuxnet. It was 20 times the size of average malware at the time. It was packed with multiple zero-day exploits, stolen digital certificates, and root-level stealth. Stuxnet was a cyberkill game-changer, the likes the world had never witnessed before. This wasn't cybercrime, this was cyber warfare. And Stuxnet was quite literally the first cyber weapon ever unleashed by one nation-state on another to cause physical destruction. But the question is why? Why take such a risk? Why go covert instead of overt? To understand the issue at hand, we need to go back even further to examine the origins of Iran's nuclear dreams. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. Iran's nuclear ambitions didn't start in secret, not at all. In fact, they began openly with the help from the United States as far back as the 1950s under the Atoms for Peace program. But things changed after the 1979 Islamic Revolution with the overthrow of the Shah and the rise of the radical Islam rule under Ayatollah Khomeini. Suspicions grew, tensions rose, and by the early 2000s, Iran's program had gone dark. Then came the leak. In 2002, An Iranian dissident group revealed the existence of Natanz, a covert uranium enrichment facility. The global response? Outrage, concern, and ultimately, sanctions. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, soon began inspections. Iran denied it was building a bomb, but evidence mounted. By 2006, diplomacy was stalling. Israel's patience was thinning, and Iran had begun operating P-1 centrifuges in growing numbers. For Washington, a military strike carried massive geopolitical risks. Oil markets, civilian casualties, regional war, the fallout was almost endless. So, instead of warplanes and direct military confrontation, the U.S. decided to unleash code. Olympic Games was greenlit by President Bush and escalated under President Obama. What began as a cyber recon mission quickly evolved into an active campaign. The NSA, CIA, and Unit 8200 from Israel built a full-scale replica of Natanz at a secret U.S. base. There, they could simulate Iran's systems and test different strains of malware, perfecting the timing, the infiltration, and ultimately, the destruction of the centrifuges. And then, when the time was right, they deployed it. Not once, but in waves. Early versions of Stuxnet tested the waters, but the later versions were much more aggressive. By 2009, the worm was in place. By 2010, it was doing real damage. Up to 1,000 centrifuges, nearly a fifth of Iran's capacity, were rendered useless, all without leaving a fingerprint. It's one thing to write malicious code. It's another thing entirely to make it work in the real world, especially against one of the most secure facilities on Earth. That's what made Operation Olympic Games so historic, but also so dangerous. This wasn't just a malware campaign. It was unofficially a joint, unacknowledged covert operation conducted by two of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world, the NSA and Israel's Unit 8200. Everything was going great with Stuxnet until it got out. And here's where the story takes a turn. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. In 2010, a version of Stuxnet somehow escaped its Iranian sandbox. It began spreading globally, appearing in systems across Europe and Asia, places it was never intended to be. The security researchers in Belarus were the first to notice the strange behavior of the worm. Soon, analysts at Symantec, Kaspersky, and others joined in, and what they found shocked the cybersecurity world. This was no ordinary virus. It was weaponized code, brilliant, deeply engineered, and clearly state-sponsored. And the world now had a question: who made this and why? Back in Washington, the leak of Stuxnet's existence was an unintended consequence and a major political problem. Until then, Operation Olympic Games had been one of the most tightly held secrets in U.S. intelligence history. It wasn't just the malicious software that was sensitive, it was the implications of what it had done. As mentioned earlier, President Obama had inherited the program from President Bush. But where Bush authorized its creation, Obama expanded it.
I said that these cyber threats were one of the most serious economic national security challenges that we face as a nation, and I made confronting them a priority.
And expanded it greatly. He approved new deployments, pushed for more aggressive variants, and closely tracked its impact. But when Stuxnet spread beyond Iran and began being picked apart by analysts, the White House knew the cat was out of the bag. Soon, journalists like David Sanger of the New York Times began publishing detailed reports on the operation, citing anonymous government sources. The most damaging disclosure? That the U.S. and Israel had built Stuxnet together. Suddenly, Operation Olympic Games wasn't just a secret mission, it was an international controversy. Back in Washington, rumors began swirling of the leaking of Operation Olympic Games' classified cyber capabilities, which put the entire U.S. playbook at risk. The leaks revealed tactics, tools, and partnerships, and it sparked a fierce internal investigation. Eventually, four-star General James Cartwright, nicknamed Obama's General, was accused of leaking information to the press. Cartwright denied any malicious intent. He argued he was clarifying details, not betraying secrets. Nonetheless, he was indicted for lying to the FBI. However, before sentencing, President Obama pardoned him. The damage, however, was done. The world had now witnessed the first known act of cyber sabotage by a nation state. And more importantly, it had worked. But if America had fired the first digital shot, would Iran fire back? That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. In 2012, Iran launched a retaliatory cyber strike. The target? Saudi Aramco, the largest oil company in the world and a key U.S. ally. The weapon? A piece of malware called Shamoon. But unlike Stuxnet, Shamoon wasn't surgical. However, it was blunt, brutal, and destructive. It wiped data from over 30,000 workstations, replacing files with a burning American flag. The damage took months to repair, and it sent a clear message to the White House: we can hit you back. And Iran didn't stop there. Between 2012 and 2013, Iranian hackers launched coordinated DDoS attacks on U.S. banks. Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Chase, Wells Fargo, all experienced outages. Websites crashed, online services stalled. Millions of dollars in disruptions. Public trust eroded. This wasn't just about revenge. This was Iran signaling to the United States that it had entered the cyber arms race. It had learned the game and was playing to win. Cyber experts began warning that the world was entering a new phase of geopolitical tension. One fought not with tanks or planes, but with malware, exploits, and logic bombs. By 2015, Iranian-linked groups were targeting U.S. infrastructure, power grids, and water systems. Cyber warfare was no longer theoretical. It was here, and it was spreading. But perhaps the most chilling part of the saga? What if Stuxnet hadn't worked? What if Iran had reached weapons-grade uranium in time? Would the U.S. have pushed the ultimate button, ironically, launching a nuclear strike to stop another country's nuclear ambitions? Let's talk about the plan that almost followed. It was a campaign so massive, it made Stuxnet look like a warm-up act. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. By 2010, Stuxnet had done its damage. It slowed Iran's nuclear program, forced them to replace hundreds of centrifuges, and showed the world that cyber weapons were no longer science fiction. But the United States and Israel were not done. Behind the scenes, a second, far more expansive program was underway. Its name? Nitro Zeus. Where Stuxnet was a scalpel, Nitro Zeus was a sledgehammer. A full-scale, top-secret cyber contingency plan designed to shut down Iran's entire infrastructure if diplomacy failed and war became inevitable. This wasn't just about nuclear facilities. Nitro Zeus aimed to infiltrate and potentially disable Iran's air defenses, power grid, telecommunications, and transportation networks, all in the opening months of a conflict. In other words, it would paralyze the country, turning it back to the Stone Age, and it would continue to keep Iran in the Stone Age as Nitro Zeus involved planting code deep inside Iranian networks over a period of years, essentially cyber bombs hidden like sleeper cells waiting for a single trigger. How catastrophic would Nitro Zeus have been? Well, estimates suggested it would have affected tens of millions of people in the Iranian state. And yet, it was never used. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, gave diplomacy a chance. With international inspections, Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. So, Nitro Zeus stayed dormant, but the fact that it existed proved a chilling point. The U.S. was preparing for a full-spectrum cyber warfare. Not just one-off attacks, but strategic domination of enemy systems. And if Nitro Zeus had launched, it would have been the first full-scale digital battlefield in human history. As Olympic Games and Nitro Zeus leaked into public view, the backlash wasn't just diplomatic, it was internal. In 2012, details about Stuxnet's origins appeared in the New York Times, written by journalist David Sanger. His report was stunning, detailed, and clearly sourced from inside the intelligence community. The Obama administration launched a major investigation to uncover the leak.
And they're classified for a reason. Because they're sensitive.
Soon, suspicions fell on General James Cartwright, a top military advisor who helped develop the U.S. cyber strategy. And as previously discussed, Cartwright was ultimately charged not for the leak, but for lying to investigators, and again, he was pardoned by President Obama. But the fallout went far beyond one general. The leak forced Washington to reckon with the new reality. That cyber weapon, unlike conventional arms, can't be contained. Once malware is released into the wild, intentionally or not, it can be copied, repurposed, or turned against its creators. That's exactly what happened in the years following Stuxnet. Hackers and state-sponsored groups studied its code, learning its tricks. Some of those techniques would appear in future attacks. And so, the line between defense and offense, deterrence and provocation, was rapidly disappearing. And so were the rules of cyber war. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story one last time. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We are now living in an era of warfare without rules. There is no Geneva Convention for code, no cyber equivalent of nuclear treaties, no global watchdog to monitor digital arsenals. So, when the U.S. unleashed Stuxnet, it raised a question that no one was ready to answer. Is a cyber attack an act of war? According to Richard Clarke, former White House cybersecurity advisor, the answer is yes. He says if you destroy a power plant with a bomb, it's an act of war. If you destroy it with a line of code, it's still an act of war. The problem is no one wants to say that out loud. Why? Because if you call it war, you have to respond. You invite escalation. You risk retaliation. So nations tiptoe around the term. They call these events incidents, operations, intrusions. But make no mistake, what happened at Natanz was an act of sabotage on sovereign infrastructure. That sets a precedent. And in a world where North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran, and even rogue non-state actors are developing offensive cyber capabilities, that precedent matters. Because in cyberspace, attribution is hard, response is risky, and escalation is key. And there are no borders, only bandwidth. So what happens when the next cyber war weapon doesn't just spin centrifuges out of control, but shuts off your electricity, crashes your markets, takes your hospitals offline? What happens when the war comes not with bombs, but with digital bytes and you are the collateral damage? You see, Stuxnet was just the beginning, not an anomaly. It was the world's first known digital weapon, but it won't be the last. The logic that created it, the rationale, the secrecy, the success, has opened the floodgates. Now, more than a dozen countries maintain active cyber warfare units. Private firms sell zero-day exploits like arm dealers, and critical infrastructure everywhere, from water systems to power grids to voting machines, they're all vulnerable. As cyber war becomes more normalized, more invisible, more asymmetric, one question looms. Who holds the power and who pulls the plug? In our next episode, we go back in time to 1980 and deep inside the Iranian desert with Operation Eagle Claw and the desperate attempt to free 52 American hostages held in Tehran. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Charles Denyer. This is Threat Level Red.
Threat Level Red is a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. For more information, visit charlesdenyer.com to learn more about current and upcoming podcasts and episodes, current and future book publications, professional services offered by Charles, and much more. All opinions expressed are those of the host and do not reflect the official positions of any government agency, military branch, or national security organization.